My name is Anastasia, and I'm 29 years old now. But this story begins 10 years ago when I was just 19 and living in a small village. I was young, innocent, and believed the best in everyone. There was a young man in our village named Watson. He was 22, wealthy, and incredibly handsome. He drove an expensive car, wore designer clothes, and had a gold watch that caught the sunlight. Nearly every girl in the village dreamed of being with him, and I was no different. I fell for him completely. But not everyone shared my admiration. People whispered about Watson constantly. They said he drank too much, lived recklessly, and had a terrible reputation. My mother warned me repeatedly to stay away from him. My aunt called him Trouble with a capital T, yet I refused to listen. I was convinced they simply didn't understand him the way I did. Love, I thought, made me see the real Watson that others couldn't. One Friday evening, there was a dance party in the village. I begged my mother to let me go, promising I'd stay close to my friends the entire time. But reluctantly, she agreed, though I could see the worry in her eyes. Watson showed up at the party, and when he smiled at me, my heart raced. He asked me to dance, and I felt like I was floating. We danced through every slow song, held hands during breaks, and talked about everything and nothing. He made me laugh in ways I'd never experienced before. When the party ended, Watson suggested we go for a drive. Without thinking twice, I said yes. His car was well known throughout the village, a symbol of his wealth and status. We drove through the quiet, dark streets under a sky full of stars. At first, everything felt magical and perfect. But then Watson drove us to an isolated spot far from any lights or people. He stopped the car and turned to me with a look that made me uncomfortable. He leaned in to kiss me, but something felt wrong. I pulled back and told him I wanted to go home. Watson ignored my words completely. He grabbed my hand and touched me in ways I didn't want. I pushed him away as hard as I could and shouted at him to stop. His expression turned cold and angry. He called me boring, opened the car door, and shoved me out onto the dark road. Then he simply drove away, leaving me alone in the darkness. I stood there, terrified and freezing. My house was 3 kilometers away. There were no streetlights, no passing cars, no one to help. I started walking in my uncomfortable party shoes, feeling every sharp stone beneath my feet. By the time I reached home, my feet were covered in blisters and my heart was shattered. I sat on my bed and cried until I had no tears left. I had loved Watson so deeply, but he hadn't cared about me at all. The next day, I confided in my friends about what happened. To my shock, they told me Watson had done similar things to several of them. When I asked why no one had warned me, they said everyone in the village already knew what kind of person he was. They assumed I knew too. That night taught me a painful but valuable lesson about trusting the wrong people. Slowly, I picked up the pieces of my broken heart and moved forward. 2 years later, I left the village and moved to the city, determined to build a better life. I found work at a small bookstore and I loved everything about it. The smell of old books, the quiet afternoons, the conversations with customers. One rainy day, I stood waiting under a tree without an umbrella, hoping the downpour would stop. A tall man approached me, holding a large white umbrella. He asked if I needed help, and when I looked up at his kind smile, something inside me softened. His name was Stanley, and he worked in an office nearby. He walked me all the way to the bookstore. Stanley started visiting the bookstore every single day. He'd buy a book, then come back the next day for another. We talked about literature, movies, our dreams, and our lives. He was funny and gentle, making me laugh in ways that felt healing. Eventually, he asked me to coffee, and I said yes. At a cozy cafe, Stanley told me about his younger sister whom he adored, and his dreams of traveling the world. I shared stories about my family and my journey to the city. We began meeting regularly, exploring parks, museums, and movie theaters together. Then suddenly, Stanley stopped coming to the bookstore. Days turned into weeks with no word from him. My old fears returned. Maybe he was just like Watson. Maybe I was foolish to trust again. Maybe true love didn't exist for someone like me. I felt myself sinking back into sadness and doubt. One rainy evening, as I walked home feeling utterly alone, I saw a familiar white umbrella. Stanley was standing outside my building, waiting for me. My heart leaped. I asked where he'd been, and he explained that his sister had been seriously ill and he'd had to care for her. Relief and happiness washed over me. He invited me for a walk in the rain, and under that white umbrella, the city lights reflecting off wet streets, I felt truly warm for the first time in weeks. Our relationship deepened after that. Stanley was patient, caring, and genuine in ways I'd never experienced. One beautiful day, he took my hand, looked into my eyes, and asked me to marry him. Through tears of joy, I said yes, without hesitation. Now, 8 years later, Stanley and I share a small house with a garden. We're expecting our first baby any day now. Sometimes when it rains, we still take that white umbrella and walk together through the streets, remembering how we met. I think about Watson occasionally. My friends tell me he's still drinking heavily and has been through 2 failed marriages. I feel genuinely grateful that things turned out the way they did. That terrible night when I was 19 felt like the end of my world, but it was actually the beginning of my strength. It taught me to recognize real love when it finally appeared. Life has a strange way of working out. Sometimes the people we think we love are exactly the ones we need to lose. Sometimes we must walk through darkness alone to appreciate the light. And sometimes, when we least expect it, someone appears with an umbrella in the rain and changes everything. True love isn't about expensive cars or gold watches. It's about kindness, patience, and someone who shows up when it matters most.